Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to Experience League Live. My name is Doug Moore. I'm the host today and glad to have you with us. We're excited about today's show. We got a great show planned for you, a couple of great guests. So we're going to have a fun time and hope that you enjoy it. Again, brought to you by experienceleague.adobe.com. And, Experience League is your one-stop shop for everything self-help with the Experience Cloud. So if you want your documentation, you got playlists of videos, you've got video tutorials, even the community, so you can talk to your peers as well. So come on over to experienceleague.adobe.com for all the goodness. So without further ado, this great show about content analytics. Let's bring in our guests, and our first guest is Jennifer Workmeister. Jen, welcome. You have fans. I don't know if you knew that here, but you've got fans.
Well,
and
nice to be here.
All right, yeah, awesome. And before we get to know you a little bit, let's bring in our other guest, and Shay O'Reilly. Shay. There you go. You got the air horn there, and that's your thing. So maybe whenever you say something really cool today, I'll just we'll give one of those. So anyway, you guys, thanks for being on the show today. And before we just jump right in, let's just take a minute and let the audience get to know you guys a little bit. So Jen, let's start with you. Tell us your job title and role. Kind of give us just a quick understanding of what you do all day.
Sure. I'm Jennifer Workmeister. I'm a senior product manager here at Adobe. I've been working at Adobe for over 5 years, and I've been working on content analytics for just over a year now, thereabouts.
Nice.
We just released it in March, and so I'm super excited to talk to you guys about it today.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll get back to the fun fact here. I want to ask you about that fun fact that we had. But Shay, how about you? Tell us your job role and what you do.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Shay. I'm a product manager as well here on CJA and Adobe Analytics. I've been here about 7 years as a product manager. Having a lot of fun with that. I have been working very closely with Jennifer in getting content analytics through to here, focusing on data collection and implementation side of things. So more the back end, get the data in part.
Nice. Okay, that's awesome. Can't wait to hear about the whole gamut. We're going to run the gamut on content analytics today. That's great. Okay, Jen, let's just let's hear a little bit more about this fun fact of oil painting, and that's really cool. I do love to hear about painting, but the other one actually intrigued me even a little bit more, and that is the stained glass. And so, I know I asked you to kind of show us maybe one of your creations there. What do you got there for us to show us a little example of your fun times?
Yeah, sure. So I do love painting. I live in the mountains and I spend all day looking outside and just being like every moment you want to capture. And a picture never really does that. So I've been
all right.
tinkering,
yeah.
It's in the middle here, tinkering
Nice.
around with oil painting.
Yeah, very
and
nice.
here's a fun fact about the oil painting is I'm not using traditional oils. I'm using water mixable oils.
Oh,
'Cause I have cats and I cannot use the turpentine that you have to use with traditional oils. So they've
got
actually
it.
changed the oil at a molecular level to make it so that you can actually use water to thin the paint and also use soap and water to clean up, which is really nice.
Oh, there you go.
And then the other thing that I've really started to enjoy is stained glass. So this started with I live in a housing development. I have these huge 2-story windows that face right into my neighbor's house. It's like 6 feet away. And I'm like,
no.
I want my living room to feel intentional and not like the developer just didn't care. And so I was like, how do I solve this problem? And I'm looking at window films and there's all these pretend stained glass ones. And I'm like, why don't I just do real stained glass? So I started getting into that. Here's one of the first pieces.
Oh, hey, look at that.
But
Wow.
here's another fun artifact. There's two different ways of doing stained glass. So this is called the foiling method, and you tend to do it with like little sun catchers and like cute little designs like this. But after learning all that, I find out that it's inappropriate for larger windows. You have to use a completely different method for larger windows for it to be structurally sound. So now I know both.
That is amazing. And now you can, do have something a little bit better to look at than just saying hi to your neighbors all the time. That's great.
Well,
Okay,
almost. I
awesome.
haven't actually done the windows yet.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just
Well,
learning the skills. Eventually,
uh,
check in with me next year.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Shay, you're a soccer player. We're learning, and that you were able to keep playing soccer even when you were in a facility.
I did go into I'm here in the Bay Area, and
Yeah.
was on a soccer team outside the correctional facility, but then got the opportunity, to play inside San Quentin prison with a team of inmates. Yeah, that was a really interesting experience, like in the yard there in the central area,
Wow.
with everybody. Um, the most well-behaved game you've ever seen. Most
Yeah,
games
I
are a
would
lot of
say. I would say,
complaining and
yeah.
people fouling each other and
Yeah.
arguing over
Sorry.
blocking top. And then, everybody has a lot to lose by being rowdy, so everybody's trying to
Yeah.
be polite.
That's funny. Yeah, here you take it. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. Well, thanks you guys. It's great to get to know you guys a little bit here for the group and let's dive in. Let's go ahead and talk about content analytics. And Jen, I think that you are going to get us kicked off here, I think. Let's get to the share. Hopefully this will work. Oh, excuse me. I'm needing to switch this over. Okay, just bear with me for a minute. And how about that?
There we go. All right.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So, as I mentioned, I'm super excited to talk to you about content analytics today. So, let's start with why did we do content analytics? Well, I mean, we work at Adobe, so we know that marketers are spending millions to create a massive amount of content. But the main challenge for the organization is that they have no idea what their content is doing, and even though it's costing them a ton of money. So the data, if it's collected, it's stored in silos. It's not available in a central reporting tool. It requires, a data scientist to figure out, what was seen. How did that eventually make an impact? It's very, very difficult. And this is at the same time that demand is continuing to skyrocket for content. So even if you have, just, 1,000 products and, 25 assets per product and, you're specializing that for even just a handful of different global regions, you're already getting into the thousands or hundreds of thousands of assets or different little content combinations around your products. So we know that there's increased digital consumption. We know that there's rising important personalized content. So there's all this demand, but we also know that AI ML is going to help in the creation of that content. So we have just this explosion of content, both from the demand side and from the supply side. But marketers are still left with questions about what's actually working about their content. How's the content actually performing? What do they actually need to prioritize for future content? What's the ROI on the content that they're producing? And even as there's more and more of a focus on personalization, are those personalization efforts actually worth it? So this is where content analytics comes in. So content analytics helps you to organize and understand your content. So it uses AI ML services to break your content down into all of its component parts. And by breaking it down into all those component parts and having this structured metadata profile, you can start to understand how content and aspects of your content are impacting what your customers are doing. So just very briefly, I want to touch on a little bit of how this works and how it's collected. So most of our customers are already collecting some kind of customer journey information where they're tracking how they travel through their site, what the interactions are, and whether or not they eventually make some kind of conversion or a purchase. So the content analytics is collected on top of that. So it uses the Web SDK to collect those content events. And so those events is basically, has the content been seen? Has the content been clicked on? Once we've captured what exactly was that content and was it seen or clicked on, that's dropped in with the rest of the web behavioral events in AEP. From there, it goes to the content identity and featurization service. That's what's going to tag each of those little pieces of content with their unique identifiers. And it's also going to break it down into all of these attributes of your content, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And so then that is all available for analysis and insights in customer journey analytics. So, whoa, that was a deep dive into sort of the architecture. Why is this important? Well, because it uses the same infrastructure as other elements that you're going to start seeing within Adobe's content supply chain. So a really good example of this is Gen Studio for Performance Marketing. Now, it's looking more at paid media. So that's like what ads are coming back in from Facebook and, what specifically was in those ads. But what's really exciting is that it's using the same featurization service. So it's understanding of, what was this image? What was the text in this ad? It's going to be coming from the same place as what we're using for content analytics. And so this makes a difference when you start looking at a multi-channel understanding of how you're serving your content and what was actually in that content. So, okay, I keep talking about breaking your content down. What exactly do we mean by that? And how is it actually going to help you? So here's just a little basic example of like a little web page. And so AI ML services are going to take a page like this and break it down into experiences or an experience and the different assets. So with an experience, you can think of it as like a bucket of content. So it's going to have the text, it's going to have an image or multiple images. And so from that experience, from that bucket, it's going to be looking at the text and it's going to be saying, what are the different attributes of this text? What was the tone of voice? How long was the text? And then there's some really interesting attributes like persuasion strategies and narratives. So you can look across all of the experiences on your website and say, hey, we see that customers that have seen and interacted with content that has this certain narrative are maybe making more purchases. Then there's the assets. So assets are their own individual units. And so each asset has an asset ID. And from each asset, we're also able to extract all of these different attributes. We have the foreground colors, the background scenes, the type of people that are in it. And so by getting all of these attributes from your content on top of like giving each piece of content its individual IDs, you can start to understand what experiences are performing the best, what assets are performing the best, and then at a macro level, the trends for what colors and what tones of voice and what persuasion strategies are resonating the most with your customers. Sorry, Doug, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was trying to decide whether to jump in and say, wow, that's super cool. Yeah. So I guess I'm curious. Yeah. I mean, so the AI is pulling all these pieces out of it, and that's great. I'm just curious of like how it's like getting, I mean, I guess it can look for smiles and happy people as far as like, is the emotion happy and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess like this tone of, I guess, how are the some of the other things determined? Is that just unique to Adobe, or is it kind of a generalized thing that is understood across different kinds of images, for example, that there's an underlying tone. I can't remember the word you were using, but more of a story or a tone of the picture.
So there's not a tone or a story of the picture. That's applied to the text. So
got it. Okay.
Narratives or the tone of voice that you're using talking to your customers. So that's the attributes that we have some examples of there in the blue. So again, you have counts of like any particular count you could want of the text, which is like sort of basic. You have readability scores, but the ones that I find really interesting are like the tone of voice, the narrative, the persuasion strategy, because that really gets to like, what is the voice that is resonating with your customers?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in fact, it looks like we have another question about this from Pace Analytics. Let's take a look at this. Does it only detect automatically, or can you feed it some categorical information that you assigned to the asset? Great
Yeah,
question.
that's a great question. So right now it's only automatic, but there's two different avenues that we are exploring because we do get asked about this a lot. So obviously, it's everybody has different content and different applications of their content. And so while we have a pretty good one size fits all set of attributes right now, like there's still going to be questions that we don't answer that's going to be appropriate for one organization and not appropriate for another organization. So the two things that we're looking at is one, can we allow them to bring in their own metadata? Because we know that some organizations have put an awful lot of work into tagging and categorizing different pieces of content that they've stored in some way already. So if they've done that, we want to allow them to bring it in. Now, obviously, anything that you do manually is not going to be as reliable or comprehensive as something that is done automatically. However, it might be more precise. So again, like that's something that we want to allow to exist next to what we're automatically tagging. The other thing that is particularly of interest is being able to sort of custom train your own model. So providing some way for you to input a series of text or images and say, these are certain. A good example is like characters that you're potentially interested in. That's something that's like not applicable to other organizations, but there's certain movie characters or game characters or whatever that you're trying to identify. Being able to custom create some sort of model that helps you to recognize and tag those characters across your site is something else that we're interested in looking at.
Awesome. We have an implementation question. I'm going to save that for you, Shay, when we get to you, I think, right? Talking a little bit more about the implementation.
Sure, yeah, we'll get into details about the implementation.
Okay, so hang in there, Deborah. We'll come back to your question for the implementation stuff. Yeah, Jen, keep going. This is great stuff.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to speed through a few more overview slides, and then I'm going to show you guys a demo, and then Shay is going to get deep into the weeds of how to set things up. So again, all of this is done automatically. And so on top of what you already have with CJA, which we know that people are already measuring content with CJA in some ways. So they still ask, like, what does this give me that's different? You do have these new dimensions. This is new and additional data that you haven't had before. So you have the experiences, you have the assets, and you have all of the attributes that are automatically generated for you through AI/ML. That automatic attribution removes the need to manually tag assets and experiences with all these different creative components. The other thing you get that we haven't talked about yet is accurate impressions. So when I talk about a piece of content being seen, for example, images, we require it to be 70% within the viewing window to consider as having made an impression. And so that's going to be really important if you have like a long web page and, only the things at the top are being seen. And it's only those things that are potentially having some sort of downstream effect on engagement and conversion. And then the last thing that is also pretty interesting when we start talking about images and things in content is this idea of perceptual deduplication. So we have an asset ID that is based on the URL that the asset is served from. But what we found is that many organizations have the exact same image appearing multiple places all over their site. And for some reason or another, it's coming from a slightly different URL. And so one of the things that the AI/ML provides is, hey, have I seen this image before? Is this image the exact same as something else that I've already looked at? And if it is, then they get the same asset perceptual ID. And so this allows you to deduplicate your assets, look at them all as a singular asset in your analysis.
Very cool.
So just to kind of sum it all up, the whole point of content analytics is really understanding your content at a very granular level, being able to tag it with AI/ML services. It's automatic. And now you have this really structured way of looking at your data that allows you to then analyze against it. So you can start to correlate elements of that content with customer interactions and start to understand what segments of customers respond best to certain things and use that for personalization and optimization of your content.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's amazing. With you're able to tie that in with segmentation, then, and that makes it Just very, very powerful.
Yeah,
Got it.
not
Love it.
everyone responds to content in the same way. So one of the fun
Yeah.
little experiments that we've done just with our own sort of play data that it's not play data, it's actually real data. And I'm going to show you that here in a little bit. It's data from Adobe employees visiting the Adobe store for just like corporate merch. But what we found is that there are differences between what people in like the California offices are looking at versus people in the Utah offices versus people in New York offices. So that's kind of
That's
interesting
really,
to see.
that is really interesting. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Now, how valid was it? I don't know. We've only had this for a little while. I'd want like a little bit more data to accumulate before I start,
Yeah.
pointing fingers at New York and saying, "Why don't you love color?" But
We want black and white only. Yeah.
I'm joking. I'm joking. That's not actually what it showed. But anyway, yeah, the understanding how different people react to different content, so you can be better at personalization and understand like when do you actually need to personalize is kind of the whole point. Which brings me to this slide. So there is sort of different levels of value that you can extract from content analytics depending on the state of your organization, your maturity, and how you plan to use content analytics. So just sort of the baseline, which was a real surprise when we started this project. I was all in on like the attributes and the personalization. And we got a lot of questions from customers around, like that's great and exciting, but really, I don't even understand where my assets are appearing. And so this is great for us because it helps us to understand which assets are receiving impressions and where. And it also helps to understand, whether they're over or underutilizing certain assets. They didn't really have a good, clean record of how assets were being used before this. The second is, okay, great, you have your content. So how is that contributing to engagement? So this doesn't get into, the full customer journey. This just is, again, like what is being seen and then what is being clicked on, what's being interacted with, and understanding that at a content level and then at a content attribute level. So what are the attributes that are causing increased engagement? One of the really interesting things we saw with an early beta customer is that images with like light blue garments had a surprisingly high click-through rate. And that's something that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But by looking at it just based on color and just based on like image click-through rate, we were able to very quickly and very easily see like something is trending here. The third level is then combining that information with your full customer journey level or your full customer journey data. So not just was this image clicked on or engaged with, but who has clicked on and engaged with this image and how did that impact the rest of their journey? Did that cause them to interact differently later on? Did that cause them to convert? What is the actual ROI of, an image impression? If they didn't click on it, but they did see it, did that image make a difference? And then the last, of course, is getting to what we were just talking about, which is that segmentation, that personalization. We kind of hear two different stories from organizations when they talk about personalization. The first is like, we are all in, like, tell us what the opportunities are. And the second is, I know I have to personalize, but it's expensive. So please tell me where I absolutely have to and like where I can maybe get away with not personalizing specific images. And content analytics is going to help with both of those tasks.
Nice.
Okay. So I'll pause there for some questions. Otherwise, we can get into the demo.
I think we can jump right in. We're going to
Okay.
forge onward.
Here we go. Everyone see that?
We can see it.
Okay. So now I'm going to show you what content analytics looks like in Workspace. So again, these are dimensions that are available for analysis alongside the rest of your customer journey dimensions here in Workspace. So starting with just experiences, I'm very quickly able to see like how my experience engagement has changed. And that's like a pretty good indicator of just like what has been happening on my site. Is there more or less engagement? It doesn't tell me what content's working yet, though. It's just sort of a pre-indicator. I should also pause and say right now we're going through the template that comes with content analytics that kind of helps you get started really quickly and understand how to use content analytics. So anyway, I can take this as a little cue My click-through rate is extremely high because if you think about it, right now an experience is an entire web page. And so you have to click on a web page to even just navigate off of it. So we do expect a click-through rate right now of over 100%. But the fact that it's 180 tells me there's some clicking around happening on my web pages. So I can see what the top converting experiences are here. But this is a little bit hard to read, which is why we've included thumbnails in the tables. So here's a little example of just, the Adobe Store homepage. And it tells you how many impressions it's had, when it was first seen, when it was last seen. And again, this is a version of a page. It's not the page entirely, it's a specific version of the page. So if you change your page, you have a different version of the homepage, that's going to register as a new experience. So anyway, it tells me that this particular version has run from April 7th to May 28th. It shows all of the different experience attributes. So again, this is going to be focused on text. And it also tells me how many assets were in that experience. And if I hit breakdown, it shows me like, hey, you can drag asset ID into this experience and it'll tell you like, here are the different assets that appeared in this experience. And here too, you can pop it open and get a little bit more information on what was that asset. It's a little Adobe drinking flask. And it too has been running from April 7th to May 28th.
And so, yeah, and you're talking about assets, so those are images. And then you said experiences, which is that the whole page or is that the text on the page?
That is the entire page.
Okay.
So this experience contains both text and images. So the images are cataloged here, and it says, here's all the images that were contained within this experience. However, the attributes are going to be focused only on text. So if you think about it, like we've got this little orange fanny pack here. But if you were looking at the full experience, you wouldn't say that the whole experience has an orange foreground, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like that really just applies to that image. And so it's only the text attributes that are collected at the experience level.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So with these, we also have all of the different metrics you could possibly want to understand about your experiences. You have your views, your clicks, your click-through rate, how many individuals have actually seen the experience. And here I'm looking at cart additions. And so I have the percentage change between these two time periods. This is from the earlier time period. This is from the recent time period. I have it sorted by cart additions. And so you can see which experience is contributing the most to cart additions. And so this is really important because this is the bread and butter of content analytics, is being able to look at what is that ultimate action that I want a user to take, and how do I attribute that back to what it is that they've seen or they've interacted with. So here I've used a linear attribution model, but you can change that to whatever is reasonable or most relevant to your business. And so again, this becomes even more important when you start talking about assets and asset impressions, because just because someone has seen an asset doesn't mean that they've clicked on it. But just because they haven't clicked on it doesn't mean it didn't make some kind of impression on them or influence how they how they journeyed or how they converted in your website later. And so this allows you to see, based on what was seen, what is actually a converting asset. So again, here I've used a linear attribution, and maybe that's not the most appropriate one for the Adobe Store, because you can see new, this little eco sign, sale, those are probably not what's actually driving purchases. It's probably more these are the things that are appearing on pages prior to purchases a little bit more. So you have to think critically about correlation versus causation and what's going to be the most appropriate here. So one of the things that's really cool about having it as just, dimensions in your workspace is you can also apply it to visualizations the way you could with any other dimension. So here I have cart additions versus asset views. And again, this has an attribution model associated with it. And unfortunately, we have this outlier out here that's making this scatter plot not very cool. But in most scatter plots, particularly with this attribution model, we see a pretty clear correlation between views and cart additions, which you just saw in the table above. However, there's going to be outliers. And so, unfortunately, this is an outlier in both dimensions. And so it makes it hard to look at these. But this is what's going to help you identify like what's being viewed a lot, but isn't really contributing to like proportionally contributing to cart additions, and what's not being viewed very much, but is proportionally contributing an outsized number to cart additions. And so that's going to help you figure out what assets maybe you can like offload from your site or deserves like a little less prominence, and what assets are maybe being slept on and you need to bring to a higher prominence within your site.
Very cool.
And then lastly, I just want to touch on the attributes because we've talked about them a lot. So how does that actually look at analysis? So here I've actually started with a special attribute category because we talked about the different categories. You've got foreground colors, background scenes, etc. You're down to like camera angles and lighting. But sometimes some of those things make a big difference and sometimes they don't make a big difference. So maybe the color red makes a big difference, but the rest of the colors, not so much. And so we've created one mega attribute category that allows you to look at all of the attributes in one continuous list and sort of rank them against each other. So that's what we're looking at here. So what we see is visual attention spread low is contributing the most to cart additions, which is kind of interesting. Here you can see the percentage change over the last 30 days. So there's actually been less of a percentage change there than, what is this, foreground color black. So apparently foreground color black is kind of trending or spiking. And so talking about trending and spiking is actually really important too. And so that's what this graph down below gets to. So what we found coming up to Summit when we were looking at, you know, what's been changed, what has a high percentage change, we saw that foreground colors of black and red were really popping. It looked like they were really doing well all of a sudden right before Summit. We were like, well, why is that? Like, I don't think Adobe employees are naturally just like that stoked on like Adobe colors. What's going on? And when we looked at the graph for that particular item, we could see that there were like 2 days of like extremely high purchases associated with having seen images with this red and black. And when we dug into it a little bit further, understood like what images had red and black, what pages were they appearing on, it was Adobe staff shirts leading up to Summit. So that was kind of interesting as we were able to see like, okay, like that's what's happening there. So anyway.
Yeah, that's a great little little journey that you took to get to the root of that issue.
You can,
I'm
of
assuming,
course,
sorry, just to jump in.
Go ahead.
I'm assuming with Workspace, like any other project, you know, you said that this is kind of out of the box to help people get going, but then
Yeah, this is a
I'm
template.
sure, yeah, the template, yeah. I'm assuming you can, you know, move these around and say, like, if you scroll up a little bit here, you're like, you know, I want that line graph all the way across the screen. I'm going to make that a little bit wider,
yeah, of
or stuff
course.
like
You
that.
can
You
do
have the
whatever you want with
opportunity
this.
to move things around and do whatever you want, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want. I can move
Yeah.
things around. If I wanted to see, like, here I have my different colors. If I wanted to see, okay, you know, what are we talking about? Asset perception ID. What assets were considered to have white?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's going to show me these different assets have white as the foreground.
Right. Okay, cool.
So that's also really useful too, because with the different attribute categories, if you're like, I don't know what that means, or I'm not sure it's doing that right, you can do that little drag and drop and see, like, is that consistent with your expectations for your business? Is this something that you want to use?
Nice.
And I chime in and just say you can use these dimensions and metrics, of course, in any report you already have existing. So if you built something up and you want to layer in this kind of content interaction or content attribute information, you can drop it in there too. This template is really just gets you a head start and is oriented around those kind of use cases.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah. Great.
Great. So I'll leave it there. Again, I'll pause for questions, but otherwise I'd love to hand it over to Shay to get into the nuts and bolts of how all this works.
Yeah. People, you know, feel free to ask questions. We've had a couple, of course, and Deborah's still waiting for us, Shay, with the question there. So we're gonna get to that. But Should we move over to your share?
Sure. Yeah, and we can field
Okay.
questions on all aspects as we go. But yeah, we'll get into this and
Yes.
we'll answer Deborah's
Okay.
question.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Doug. So now, yeah, you've seen sort of what it looks like, what you can do with it in terms of like let's talk a little bit of how it gets put together, how it works under the hood. I'm sure a lot of you are responsible for that side of things, of implementing and constructing the data. So for starters, I'm just going to kind of set the tone in terms of a very simplified version of how CJ's reporting pipeline works, but essentially, you get web activity, page views, link clicks, whatever else you've instrumented. Those land in an experience platform in the form of web events and some data set or multiple data sets, depending how you've got. You may have other events coming from, not web. They could be mobile. They could be offline. That's the power of experience platform in CGA, being able to pull in data like, call center, for example, cross-channel, any other kind of events. Those events get blended by the CJ reporting engine and then surfaced in CJ reporting. And that's how we stand today. And that's the kind of standard CJA. And then content analytics is an add-on to that. So we've got it's going to market as a CJ add-on is how you purchase it. And so what you're really getting, and this goes a little to Deborah's question, is we record these content interactions, these asset views, these asset clicks, experience views, experience clicks as a separate stream of data. We use the Web SDK in a specialized, standardized schema, go into their own data set of events. So you'll have your web events and your content events. And this blue there kind of outlines what's new for content analytics. So you've got content interactions being recorded in their own separate data stream, separate data collection flow. That data lands in experience platform, as Jennifer kind of alluded to earlier. As those content events come in, when we see new ones, we see like, oh, there's a new image on your page at a certain URL. We have our identity and attribute service retrieve those images and then go and render those images from your site or the page and the text, capture that image or text, and then derive attributes or features of it. And then that gets sent back into Experience Platform as lookup data sets. So you have a content or asset attribute data set and then experience attribute data set. And those are all combined. And then that then goes into the CJ reporting engine and you get serviced, the way we just saw now under the hood there is how this gets fed into that view Jennifer was just showing. So
Yeah.
to speak a little, so go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of. So you're kind of mentioning Deborah's second question there, and that is, could you cover or recap how the perception ID comes into being? So how are those IDs assigned? I guess maybe
Yeah.
as this comes in.
I can handle that. So at that, the featurization process, the identity and attribute service, it will like say get a new image, new URL. Says I've never seen this URL, so I need to go featurize it. It brings up that image. It looks at that image, says, oh, actually, I've seen this image before. It was at a different
Yeah.
URL on the site, and then they get this sort of combined ID, and so then you will see in reporting
Yeah.
that shared identity, a little like a mini graph there, right? Like there's one ID and then two asset sort of URLs to them, and so you could see see them in reporting rolled up or split out if you want that kind of difference. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's clear.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Is this a good time to maybe answer her other question too, which is,
Yeah.
is it a few out of the box field groups that we would need to add to the schema from an implementation perspective or point of view?
Yeah, from an implementation perspective, it's a bit novel. It's a bit different in that you're not adding information to your existing events. Your existing events remain as they are, and then we're capturing new sets of events that are completely separate, going into their own data set, and they have their own data structure, and there's sort of technical infrastructure reasons why we did that. So you don't add those field groups, but there is a standard schema, which I could share, and that data being collected is very standardized about when it goes and when it doesn't. I'll walk through the sort of implementation process. We have a streamlined sort of wizard for implementation. A lot of it's done out of the box, easily done, and then can be modified later. But we're using very standardized data structure for those events.
Great.
I think I will then jump into how the implementation is done. So the actual implementation, there's a different kind of data structure and process here, or some things that are different, a lot of them are the same. But then we've also built a new way to start, and actually implement to speed that up, since there's, the whole end to end can take a lot of small pieces. We are doing this in one big swoop. So there's this new data management menu, which you may have seen, and it has your connections and data view, as well as this relatively new shared metrics and dimensions, as well as content analytics configuration. So when you have this content analytics enabled, you would click on this, it would bring you to this page, which lists your configurations. And these are essentially end-to-end implementations of content analytics. We allow one per sandbox. So you can create one in a sandbox, and that will handle everything from tags data collection. This initial release, as we're at now, only supports tags for the collection of the content analytics events, through data stream into experience platform, then your connection, your data view, and your reporting in CJ, and it will create all of these. What we do is we gather information. So we have just a simple configuration form, and you'll see that it's quite brief. We capture the minimum amount of information you need, so you can go in here and say, I want to create my own content analytics one. This is a duplicate, so I just avoid the duplicate check. You choose your data view, so you can select the data view, and this list is a bit shorter here because it only shows the ones that are in Sandbox that don't already have content analytics. But when you're starting from scratch, you'd have all your data views here. You choose save, you get some information about what's going to happen to the data view. Essentially, what's going to happen is the data view, when you implement, which you haven't implemented yet, there's a button up here that does that. It will update the data view with all the dimensions and metrics Jennifer showed there. You don't have to manually create those. It will just automatically create those along with the report template, and we'll also do the configuration of the connection related to this data view. So you can see we've derived the sandbox here, and so now we've got one sandbox tied to this. And then you've got some information around experience capture and definition. So experience is kind of a new concept with content analytics. The experience is sort of the container of the content in which the content sits, sort of a grouping. At this point, the experience is the whole web page. We're looking at ways to go more granular, but right now it's the whole web page. And we reproduce the web page based on the URL of the page. So we've set it to disabled for starters here, because it only applies to websites where the content on the page is driven by the URL. If it's driven by something else like cookies or other signals, that then potentially when we try to reproduce the experience the user saw on the page, the same URL could produce different experiences, therefore that data wouldn't be good. So, but if that applies to you, and your content is, your page textual content is driven by text or by the URL, then we have some room here to add some more detail about that. So what we have here for a regular expression is basically a way to specify. Well, I'll start with the query parameters. So in terms of query parameters, some are relevant to your content and some are not. And so if you have things like campaign ID, which typically don't drive content, whereas other things like sorting or other things that might drive the text or the content of the page, you indicate what those are, and then we will ignore any other parameters in the URL in terms of defining what an experience URL is. And then this specifies, it's a regular expression, not easy to read, but these days you need a lot of help in terms of what those are. We have a bit of validation here. This one is saying, look at look at adobe.com, except the enterprise pages. And so that's kind of the scope of the pages where these kind of URLs are relevant. So if you have different parts of your site where different URLs drive content, then you would specify that here. You can add other pairs of these if you want. And this all goes into essentially configuring a tags extension, the content analytics extension in Adobe Tags. And so after the implementation, you can go and edit this in the tags extension itself if you want to.
But it's going to be created from here, right? It creates it from here. Yeah.
Yeah. So you complete this, you'll click implement. It's going to create several things, and I'll point those out at the end. All the artifacts you need, basically end-to-end for implementation. And then you can go, and what we're doing is we're taking our sort of best guess default implementation that will get you running end-to-end. And then you can make adjustments. There's important things like consent, for example. We'll set up the web SDK with certain consent options. You of course want to double check and make sure those match what you want to do. In terms of tags properties, you can choose an existing one or create a new one. So I've got some are already active. So I've got a sample tags property. We will also create a new one if you want. And then this allows you to specify another regular expression indicating when the tags is running the content analytics code. Are there certain pages it should ignore? So we talked to some people and they may have sort of help or manual sort of pages that are very, just meant for explanation, and they're not really things they optimize content on, like their landing page. They do more practical product images about how to, and they may not want to collect data on that because they just don't want that, in their analysis. So you can indicate which pages should or should not be included. Like in this case, I would be excluding documentation pages. Any URL that has, the page URL has documentation in it. And then within a page, even if it's running on the page, you can say ignore certain assets or include certain assets only. So an example may be the logo, like we found looking at Adobe pages, like the one we look at the store, the Adobe logos on every page. Having it in our data is not very useful. It shows up at the top of every list that's ranked by volume. Maybe
Yeah.
we're past it, but it's easier if it's just not in the data because it's not something we're going to optimize. If we were, varying, then we might do that. So here's some regular expression that would handle that. And that's all the information you need to pull in. What we're going to do is then create a project template. We're going to create a data view. We're going to update the data view with the content analytics components. We're going to update a connection with the content analytics data sets. The one I mentioned is the content events as well as the attribute event data sets. We're going to create several data sets. So events for content analytics, attributes for assets, and in this case of enabled experiences. So we'll also create attributes for those. And then we'll create two data flows, which are the ones that send data into our analytics or featurization service or attribute generation service, that AI process that brings data back in as well into these and populates those lookup data sets. So asset and experience attribute generation. These are data flows that are going to be created. And then all the way down to collection, we're going to create a tags property that's automatically configured. And we're going to create a data stream that is dedicated to this. And I'm not going to implement right now,
Yeah.
but you can see, here's one I created earlier, and you come back and edit it. And you can see I've created this. I've got my data views. I got my experience. I can turn this on or off. And I've got my tags property. And these are kind of edit buttons that will jump you into the tags property
To the right spot.
extension. So, for here, we'll jump into the content analytics extension, which you can see here. And it's got, a data stream that I created. It's got these settings that I already did. And so if I want to change them, I can change them in here. We've also got our regex text here. And so essentially what we're doing is building out this out view end to end really easily. And then you can make the changes you want to make later. Some things I would call out in terms of how this works is we will be pulling data into the content analytics events have to be collected via the Web SDK using tags. We're looking to expand beyond tags in the future. Right now, it's all collected by Web SDK. You don't need the Web SDK for your regular events, so you could be collecting them without measurement. That measurement will, and then send them into analytics, and then use the analytics data connector to send that data into Experience platform. So if you've sort of got an analytics extension, using analytics today, and you're up on CJA by feeding your data through analytics, that's fine. You'll just have to add this so that the Web SDK can collect these events directly. We can't collect content analytics events using app measurement into analytics. They need to run using Web SDK directly into Experience platform.
Coexisting then between those two.
Yes, exactly. And they get joined. They're like any data sets. There's, you've got your content events and your regular web behavioral events that get joined in the connection and then sequenced, and, we'll have the same identifiers as well.
Nice.
Maybe show this as
Is it a good time for a couple of questions, maybe?
Yeah, I've said a lot, so happy to dig into some.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. That's good stuff. So, Alva says, would developers need to optimize AEM components to better report metrics to Adobe CJA?
No, not at this point. I think that the good news and bad news about content analytics right now is it's a DAM or asset tool independent. So you don't need AEM to run this. We're working on ways that it can be more leverage AEM better. So we're talking about pulling AEM metadata. But right now, in terms of whether you have AEM or you have other tools for your site, you don't need to make any changes. We just will automatically scan the page, however your page is set up. For it's images coming into view, experiences, and collection. So there's no optimization needed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
I just want to hit on that a little bit more because even if you do have AEM and even if you have put considerable time and effort into organizing your dam, it's still a pretty common problem that authors or designers they're going to store images locally or send things through Dropbox or there's always going to be assets that are squirreled away in places that aren't sort of your centrally managed area. And so this makes sure that your analytics is consistent and correct regardless of what other systems may have been put in place and are followed or
Hmm.
not followed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
very
good.
robust that way, in that it's what's on your site, it's what people are seeing and interacting with that decides where the data is. It's not something you have to like an inventory you have to maintain and keep up to date.
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. Questions coming in. Deborah, can this add-on be added onto a select SKU?
I actually don't know off the top of my head. Do you know, Jennifer?
I saw that in the chat. And I was gonna ask you. I can't remember. I can't
Sorry,
remember
Deborah.
which ones
Okay.
it's allowed with.
Okay, here's what we're gonna do to make sure that that gets answered. I'm gonna create in the community a community post, and I'll post a link to it here on the YouTube page, and we'll make sure we answer that question in that community post. So, Deborah, come on back to this page, in the next few days, and we will make sure and get an answer to that question for you. Pace Analytics again, does it perform better when there are a greater number of pages in the analyzed set?
Um, I'm not in terms of performance. It won't change. Like if you get one image, for example, in terms of deriving its attributes, that's going to be the same whether we see it 1,000 times or not. In terms of your analysis, as Jennifer alluded to earlier, with our example about the Adobe store, obviously, like larger volumes of data make you more confident on a kind of
Mm-hmm.
analysis you make. So there are the law of large numbers sort of benefits, but in terms of, and I'm not sure if that's what was meant by performance. The attributes that are derived are not affected by volume. The sort of
Yeah.
speed of the site as it scales very well, so there's no impact there.
Yeah. And I think maybe to compare to other pages, right? This one is working the best versus this one. I mean, yeah, like you said, maybe a larger data set to compare. It's
Yeah,
still gonna give you that those numbers though for your for your conversions and stuff like that.
right.
Yeah. Like you'll still be able to have a this versus that. I think for the attribute analysis though of like red versus blue, like you're going to need more than just one red image and one blue image to really you know, make that an insight and not just this particular image versus that image worked. Like you'll want lots of red and lots of blue images to
Right,
understand.
right. So which one is better? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good. One more question. Let me see. What is the configuration needed in the Alloy library?
So we just need. So what can happen is if you're using WebSDK already, we will just add the content analytics extension, which really just configures the WebSDK in a way to collect some additional events and won't touch your existing events. So you don't need to make any changes there. If you're already using the Web SDK, if you're using app measurement and you haven't got Web SDK on the page, then as part of that flow, we will install the Web SDK as well as the content analytics extension. And then the Web SDK is just used to collect content analytics events, and that sort
Yeah,
of configuration is taken care of. So hopefully that answers your question there.
yeah. Thanks, Shay.
And to point out again, at this point it's tags only with the Web SDK is how we configure it, but we're looking to add the ability to configure it directly through, without using tags as your means for configuring Alloy.
Right, right. Okay, that'll come later with if you're not using tags. If you're just using the script.
Yeah, if you're configuring it directly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Very cool. This has been amazing. I know we're running out of time here very quickly. So, is there anything else you guys wanted to add about this and how people can benefit or how to get going? And they talked to somebody about kind of getting this added on What's how do they move forward with this if they haven't done it yet?
I think just reach
I
out. Go ahead.
was going to say the same thing. Reach out to your account representative.
Yeah,
They will be
Yeah.
happy to talk to you about it.
yeah. Okay,
And we're
awesome.
putting out like lots of information. There's a lot of documentation on how this works. Understandably, there's some kind of new things here that we're really excited about, but people need to get familiar with. So we have lots of documentation, webinars like this, materials. So
Yeah,
hopefully you can learn about it a lot
yeah.
before you sign up.
Experienceleague.adobe.com.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Jen and Shay, thank you for being here today. We've really enjoyed. I know that I've enjoyed and learned a lot about this. I hope that everybody has learned a lot about content analytics, and are excited to use it. Thanks everybody for joining us. And with that, I'm sure maybe you guys have other meetings coming up in a few minutes, so we'll let you go. And join us again next time for fun and exciting shows on Experience League Live. And we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks all. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye.